As the title of this discussion indicates, its theme is the relationship of the events presented in my novel, Atlas Shrugged, to the actual events of today's world. Or to put the question in a form which has often been addressed to me, is Atlas Shrugged a prophetic novel or a historical one? The second part of the question seems to answer the first. If some people believe that Atlas Shrugged is a historical novel, this means that it was a successful prophecy. The truth of the matter can best be expressed as follows. Although the political aspects of Atlas Shrugged are not its central theme, nor its main purpose, my attitude toward these aspects, during the years of writing the novel, was contained in a brief rule I had set for myself. The purpose of this book is to prevent itself from becoming prophetic. The book was published in 1957. Since then, I have received many letters and heard many comments which amounted in essence to the following. When I first read Atlas Shrugged, I thought that you were exaggerating, but then I realized suddenly, while reading the newspapers, that the things going on in the world today are exactly like the things in your book. And so they are, only more so. The present state of the world, the political events, proposals, and ideas of today, are so grotesquely irrational that neither I nor any other novelist could ever put them into fiction. No one would believe them. A novelist could not get away with it. Only a politician might imagine that he can. The political aspects of Atlas Shrugged are not its theme, but one of the consequences of its theme. The theme is the role of the mind in man's existence, and, as a corollary, the presentation of a new code of ethics, the morality of rational self-interest. The story of Atlas Shrugged shows what happens to the world when the men of the mind, the originators and innovators in every line of rational endeavor, go on strike and vanish in protest against an altruist collectivist society. There are two key passages in Atlas Shrugged that give a brief summary of its meaning. The first is a statement of John Galt. There is only one kind of man who have never been on strike in human history. Every other kind and class have stopped when they so wished, and have presented demands to the world claiming to be indispensable, except the men who have carried the world on their shoulders, have kept it alive, have endured torture as sole payment, but have never walked out on the human race. Well, their turn has come. Let the world discover who they are, what they do, and what happens when they refuse to function. This is the strike of the men of the mind, Miss Taggart. This is the mind on strike. The second passage, which explains the title of the novel, is, "Mr. Reardon," said Francisco, his voice solemnly calm, "if you saw Atlas, the giant who holds the world on his shoulders, if you saw that he stood, blood running down his chest, his knees buckling, his arms trembling, but still trying to hold the world aloft with the last of his strength, and the greater his effort, the heavier the world bore down upon his shoulders, what would you tell him to do?" "I don't know. What could he do? What would you tell him?" "To shrug." The story of Atlas Shrugged presents the conflict of two fundamental antagonists, two opposite schools of philosophy, or two opposite attitudes toward life. As a brief means of identification, I shall call them the reason, individualism, capitalism axis versus the mysticism, altruism, collectivism axis. The story demonstrates that the basic conflict of our age is not merely political or economic, but moral and philosophical. That the dominant philosophy of our age is a virulent revolt against reason. That the so-called redistribution of wealth is only a superficial manifestation of the mysticism, altruism, collectivism axis. That the real nature and deepest, ultimate meaning of that axis is anti-man, anti-mind, anti-life. Do you think that I was exaggerating? During and after the writing of Atlas Shrugged, I kept a file which, formally, should be called a research or documentation file. For myself, I called it the horror file. Let me give you a few samples from it. Here is an example of modern ideology from an alumni faculty seminar entitled The Distrust of Reason at Wesleyan University in June 1959. Perhaps in the future, reason will cease to be important. Perhaps for guidance in time of trouble, people will turn not to human thought, but to the human capacity for suffering. Not the universities with their thinkers, but the places and people in distress, the inmates of asylums and concentration camps, the helpless decision-makers in bureaucracy, and the helpless soldiers in foxholes. These will be the ones to lighten man's way, to refashion his knowledge of disaster into something creative. We may be entering a new age. Our heroes may not be intellectual giants like Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein, but victims like Anne Frank, who will show us a greater miracle than thought. They will teach us how to endure, how to create good in the midst of evil, and how to nurture love in the presence of death. Should this happen, however, the university will still have its place. Even the intellectual man can be an example of creative suffering. Do you think that this is a rare exception, a weird extreme? On January 4th, 1963, Time published the following news story. Ultimate performance in society, not just brains and grades, should be the admissions criterion of top colleges, says Headmaster Leslie R. Severinghouse of the Haverford School near Philadelphia. In the Journal of the Association of College Admissions Counselors, he warns against the highly intelligent, aggressive, personally ambitious, and socially indifferent and unconcerned egotist. Because these self-centered, bright students have little to offer either now or later, colleges should be ready to welcome other good qualities. Who says that brains and motivated performance represent the dimensions of excellence? Is not social concern a facet of excellence? Is it not exciting to find a candidate who believes that no man liveth unto himself? What about leadership, integrity, the ability to communicate both ideas and friendship? May we discount spiritual eagerness? And why should we pass over cooperation with others in good causes, even at some sacrifice of one's own scholastic achievement? What about graciousness and decency? None of this shows up on college board scores, chides Severinghouse. Colleges must themselves believe in the potential of young people of this sort. Consider the meaning of this. If your husband, wife, or child were stricken with a deadly disease, of what use would the doctor's social concern or graciousness be to you, if that doctor had sacrificed his own scholastic achievement? If our country is threatened with nuclear destruction, will our lives depend on the intelligence and ambition of our scientists, or on their spiritual eagerness and capacity to communicate friendship? I would not put a passage of that kind into the mouth of a character in the most exaggerated farce satire. I would consider it too absurdly grotesque. And yet this is said, heard, and discussed seriously in an allegedly civilized society. Are you inclined to believe that theories of this kind will have no results in practice? I quote from the Rochester Times-Union of February 18, 1960, from an article entitled, "Is Our Talent Running Out?" Is this mighty nation running short of talent? At this point in history, with Russia and the United States in deadly competition, could this nation fall behind because of a lack of brain power? Dr. Harry Lionel Shapiro, chairman of the Department of Anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, says, "There is a growing uneasiness, not yet fully expressed, that the supply of competence is running short. The medical profession," he says, "is profoundly worried about the matter. Studies have shown that today's medical students, on the basis of grades, are inferior to those of a decade ago. Some spokesmen for the profession have been inclined to blame this on the dramatic and financial appeal of other professions in this space age, engineering and other technological fields. But Dr. Shapiro says this seems to be a universal complaint." The anthropologist spoke before a group of science writers at Ardsley-on-Hudson. This same group listened to some 25 scientists over a 2-week period and heard the same lament from engineers, physicists, a meteorologist, and many others. These scientists, outstanding